And all of my work around education has been to highlight the fact that we are not passing on these values and these principles to our children, and therefore they can't properly defend their rights and the republic. And so I think in that score, Charlie and I agreed with that, even though we disagreed on some other finer points of things. But what I see happening is that we're being torn apart. The left knows who they are. They've got their agenda, and they're not straying from it for anything. They're more, I hate to use this word because it sounds like a compliment, but they're more sort of disciplined in terms of like holding their stupid coalition together, that they're motley crew of evil people. Okay. But it's always been harder for people on the not left. And I would include people who call themselves centrist, but they're not really centrist, right? They're just not crazy. Okay. Anybody who's like, the government's going too far, and let's get back to the Constitution, and, and or conservative, physically conservative, socially conservative, that whole crew, we're being torn apart and fragmented and turned on each other. And what I hope and pray comes out of this is that can reverse course.
It's very dangerous. And by the way, sup, Brass, good to see you here. It's very dangerous because, look, I look behind you and my heart is warmed by all the physical books I see behind you, right? And the thing about people who either currently read or grew up reading classical books, not social media, not the Cliff Notes, but the actual book itself, is that you learn to think in paragraphs and nuance, and you hold multiple ideas in your head at the same time. And the danger for somebody who occupies what I would call American values, but what I really mean is the kind of classic liberal position, is that we always have to speak with a forked tongue. Like somebody says, like, do I have the right to burn the American flag? I'm always going to have to say, yes, you have the right to burn your own flag. And then I'm going to have to say, but you shouldn't, because it's a shitty thing to do. And and it's always a complicated story. And the thing about this kind of political violence is it makes it very hard to speak in paragraphs, because people want blood, people want results, and people want something simple. Brass, I totally agree with you. Like, you don't have to agree with Charlie on anything to say that assassinating him was unimaginable.
And that's kind of been my conflict all day, is I'm not a trad con. I don't share those views. But whenever he would speak about the Constitution, whenever he would defend, free speech, especially on college campuses. Remember, I'm all about education. So I would say my bread and butter is college essay coaching, even though I want to talk every single student out of going. Like, I sit there, I'm like, let me talk myself out of a job. Do you really want to go to college? But then once they were like, no, I'm going to go into college. Okay, fine. I want to try to at least help them make good choices, like pick a school that isn't insane. And so I care a lot about this next generation. I have children, I have young adult children, and one teenager left at home. And so whenever he would talk about that, it made me feel better that, okay, maybe there's some young people who hear him and at least start thinking twice about some of the crap they're hearing on college campuses, even if they don't agree on the sort of social issues or what have you. I just wanted them to think about what your rights are and aren't, and all of that. And like I said, there are some very dark forces right now that are, it's so obvious to me, are trying to destroy call it a movement, call it whatever it was that animated during the Biden administration, during COVID. It's just like, we're done. We've had it. We've had it with this leftist crap. And I couldn't pinpoint who they are. Probably multiple people that want to tear that apart. They do not want us to be together and united, which is sort of weird, because a horrible event like this could galvanize people in a positive way, but I don't see that happening today. And that's what scares me. I see, like you said, people going, we're done. No more apologies. I want blood. I want this. I want that. And I'm like, that's what they want.
Yeah.
That's what people want to happen.
We have to make American values sexy again, because winning is sexy, right? Like, I get to impose my ideology. I get to make people do what I want them to do.
For a little while, Robespierre thought that.
Yeah, well,
then they behead you too.
It never works out, but it feels sexy, right? And I think that classic liberalism often comes off as kind of meek and permissive, because like people will say, like, what do you think of X, Y, and Z? We're like, well, I think everyone should have the right to make their own decision. Like and what you're talking about is a government structure rather than a narrative or a moral story. And I think there is a moral story. I think there really are American values. I think there is a story we can tell that's galvanizing and interesting, but it's tricky because people often want to default to something very, very, very simple. I'm thinking about it because Brass is in chat right now, and Brass and I are both, members of, like, was it? I think it's up to like 10 now, the 10 deists on X. And deism is many things, but one of the things that it struggles with is that deism has no founding religion. There's no text. There's no easy myths that you can provide someone. There's no low level narrative. And if you don't have a low level narrative, you can't convince anybody to join your cause, because not everyone's going to read 100 books to understand where you're coming from when you articulate an idea. And not everyone's going to know who Robespierre is when you drop an incredibly on the nose political reference, right? So, you've got to find a way.
Really.
Well, and that's what Charlie was so good at, is that he could communicate at a very easy to access level. So what, I think part of what I'm thinking about tonight is, like, what for classic liberals like us, what is the easy access point? How can we tell a story that's going to be understandable to people who really would prefer just to do political blood sports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what I think, I heard a great thing on the radio once. I think I was in college, and it was on July 4th, and I was listening to the radio, and somebody was reading the Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about it. It was some famous guy. The name escapes me at the moment, but he said the founders believed that we should be free to do what we ought. And then he went on to explain that they truly believed, and there are all kinds of texts that back this up, from throughout history, that oppressed people, or people who are who don't have these freedoms, are not moral people. They are more incentivized to violate other people's rights, to take things that aren't theirs, to try to get one over on people. It becomes a very dog eat dog kind of a world, because you don't have agency. So your morality is more shaped by I just need to survive, by hook or by crook, and you become, you're in competition with other people. And what I notice in the United States, it's happening, is the more government control, the more regulations, the more we're not free at a barely perceptible level. It's almost this like kind of neo-feudalism, where you don't really see the bars and see the chains, but you kind of know they're there. Like every time you turn around, there's a form to fill out, a thing to do. We're getting angrier and more frustrated and more uncivil with each other, and more inclined to just take things and push people around. And that's what he was talking about, is he was saying you can't behave morally, if you're not free. And so they wanted to create a society where you were free in those ways, and free from those kind of constraints, because that's when you can be good. And unfortunately, right now, the narrative is they're too licentious. Well, I don't believe that was the founders' version of liberalism. That was more the Marcusean thing that came in more in the 60s, where it was this radical tolerance. And the idea was that we can't let people discern what they will and won't tolerate, because that's oppressive. So what we used to do, where we'd have discernment decide, I'm not tolerating your behavior because it's bad for me to be around, or you're endangering me by, with your attitudes and whatever. They're saying, well, that's discriminatory. So let's say I wanted, for example, to discriminate as an individual against people who seemed kind of crazy.
Yeah.
They were muttering to themselves on the subway, or they're acting weird, or, they're dressed a certain way, and I feel scared of them. Okay. So I cross the street, I go somewhere else, I get off the car, I get out of the elevator, I do whatever I do, because that's both my physical sense and my common sense telling me I need to discriminate against you because you seem kind of dangerous. I have the freedom in the United States of America to do that, freedom of association and so on. In come the left-wing type of tolerant people, and they say, no, that's not what it means. You shouldn't have that freedom, that you should be forced into association with people because otherwise you're discriminating against them. And unfortunately, the narrative now is that it was liberalism that allowed that, when in fact that was a kind of totalitarianism. That was a kind of dogma that infringed on my liberty to say, I'm not hanging with you. I'm not getting in that. Yes, I'm discriminating. I don't want you to be my employee. You creep me out. Oh, it's because I look like this. It's because, nope, it's because I just don't like you. And somewhere along the way, and I would pinpoint it around the 60s, we embraced that different version of, it's not liberalism, that different kind of tolerance that was actually an inverted thing, where intolerance of individual choice for the sake of so-called tolerance. And now you've got people on the far right, whatever you want to call them, what are they? Post-liberals.
Yeah, the
Okay.
woke right.
Yeah, well, great. So now they're saying this is what classic liberalism gets you. And it's like, no, they literally squashed classic liberalism in the FDR administration, probably before that, Woodrow Wilson. So that went by the wayside. We haven't been able to, assert ourselves since pretty long ago. And like I said, I would take it back that far.
I think that there's an important germ of truth there, because when people say liberalism opened the door to this, they'll sometimes make the argument. They'll say a machine is what it does, and liberalism produced this result, so liberalism should be rejected. And I take the point. It's not a great analogy, because most of those people are also against gun control, and you wouldn't want to apply that analogy there. But let's set aside the technicalities and go to the substance of it. I don't think the machine does this. I think the machine can do this. But we, meaning classic liberals, kind of fell asleep at the wheel. And what I mean by that is that people came in and they started making these emotional appeals that are really seductive. They say, like, well, aren't you a tolerant person? What, you're an intolerant person? You don't want to be an intolerant person, do you? Well, it's not enough that you're a tolerant person. You should actually be accepting. You should be celebrating. You should be welcoming things that you find morally questionable. Because in a free society, shouldn't you embrace all these things? And there is I think that what people didn't do is what you just did right now, and stand up and say, no, 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 no. In a free liberal society with American values, there are boundaries. There are the outer bounds of what you can do. And if you're within those boundaries, I am required, I'm obligated as a citizen not to discriminate against you, not to be intolerant towards you. I'm not going to commit hate crimes, all those basic things. But I am not required to abide by your political projects. I'm not required to support you. I am an individual, and I should be treated as such.
But
and
I think
there's a moral story there.
I agree, but I can't speak for you, but I can only speak for myself. But I would say that I can go back to being like a teenager, and I was never swayed by those arguments. And I know other people who never were either. And I would say that the people who were never really fully grounded in classic liberalism. They were, and I say that again, having studied the history of education, especially compulsory education in America, in large part because by the time Horace Mann and John Dewey got hold of all our kids for this Prussian sort of socialist experiment in mass education run by the government, they literally intentionally stopped reproducing the culture that encouraged people to think in such a way that they would have been resistant en masse. So in other words, starting in the late 1800s, we just stopped reproducing the culture that gave us the Declaration, the Constitution, and so on. So how many generations since have we had where people have had just like a smattering of like, yay, the Constitution, yay, the Declaration, whatever. But that's not the foundation of it, because interspersed with all that was, you have an obligation to society. You need to take care. Remember, noblesse oblige, the progressive era, all of this history became dominant. It was like this little filter that they stuck over our Americana so that the Constitution and the Declaration became literally Americana, like little artifacts of a time gone by.
Mhm.
Isn't it quaint? Let's sing songs on the 4th of July, but you need to be grounded. You need to really
Yeah.
read, Thomas Paine. You need to read these things in school, discuss the Federalist Papers, et cetera, and so forth. Now, I was very blessed. I grew up with a grandfather and a father.
Mhm.
They were both litigators. My grandfather in particular fought in both world wars. He hated FDR. He hated Woodrow Wilson. He was born in 1896. He was like the last of the great, like one of that
Mhm.
generation that's still remembered. His parents were immigrants from Russia. They were so glad to get to a free country. So I spent a ton of time with him, and I never I'd hear these arguments in school. I went to schools full of liberal teachers, liberal professors. I was
Mhm.
like, you're cuckoo. Like, it never appealed to me because I had that grounding. We stopped giving it to our kids
Well,
a long time ago.
of course, and this is the thing that I find so frustrating. Like, if you read the Declaration of Independence, you read. I'm going to put up this comment because it's apropos. Thomas Paine is actually kind of the Bible of the class of the deists, certainly. So yeah, very
He's
popular among.
asking he's asking if man did this, if Horace
Yeah,
Mann did this. Well, he had help,
he
but
had some help.
Horace Mann was not a good person. Neither was John Dewey. Neither was John D. Rockefeller.
But the point was, the founders disagreed on a lot of things, but they actually believed in natural rights. Like,
Yes,
and I'm not saying that they believed it like in the way that people talk about moral claims today in this kind of wishy-washy subjectivism and relativism. They're saying no, there's an objective moral claim here. This is a
of course there is.
natural right. It's a God-given right, meaning it is a higher right than the government. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, they say, well, if these are sufficiently infringed, that is a justification for changing your government, in fact, because they are a higher order than your government.
I would
And
argue,
people
even if
don't,
you don't believe in
yeah,
God,
you
even
can
if you
just
don't
believe
believe
in the rights. Just
you
believe in the
can,
rights is good enough.
because it is self-evident. As they said, you look at the human animal, look at us.
Mhm,
We are rational beings. We are both rational and social beings. We exist amongst each other, and yet we exist with free will. So
mhm.
our creator, whatever that is, I think even I, as an atheist, would agree that if there's God, he creates. Okay. So like there's a creator that made all this, and we are fundamentally different than other animals. Would we question whether someone has a right to kill a bear that comes into their camp and starts
Yeah.
taking their food or threatens their life? No, we wouldn't. Why? Because we have a right to stay alive, because we exist, because we're alive. So we have a right to stay alive, and we have a right to defend our life. But why, if we replace the bear with a human, does that change? It doesn't. It's the same self evident right to your life. And then, of course, the time we spend on this earth is what life is. So if I spend that time improving things, building a fence, building a house, farming, whatever, that's manifesting my life. So it's my property. I've improved things for myself. That's how I survive. You take that from me.
Mhm.
I don't care who you are, government or somebody else, you're violating my rights. So our founders understood this based on, like I said, maybe their religious beliefs or just their observation of reality, but it doesn't matter. There's an objective way to describe natural rights, and we don't teach that to our children.
And that's incredibly dangerous because you brought up, for example, like free will. But if you talk to people, and most of my friends, just because that's who I grew up with, are vastly to the left of me politically, and most of them don't believe in free will.
Right.
Most of them don't believe in objective morality at all, let alone natural rights.
Well, and
And the
then
problem with this framework, just to complete the idea, is it to me it feels like an illegal chess move. Like, we built a government that is premised on the existence of these rights. The whole structure of the government is designed to protect them and to facilitate the quest for natural law, to learn how to live together through limited government and federalism and honoring individual rights. You benefit, you inherit this rich tradition. You get to criticize them with the freedom of speech, which is a natural right. And then you say, I don't believe in any of it. It's like saying in the middle of a chess game, I think queens can teleport, or I think rooks can go on diagonals. Like,
well,
you're in the middle of the game. You can't change the rules now.
and one of the commenters is saying, rights in nature. And it's like, okay, if you're thinking of rights as statutory, like things that are written down, or like someone is going to come in and protect you, or whatever, the way we think of them in the legal sense. Of course there's no rights in nature. I
Mhm.
mean, like but because we're built the way we're built, and we have the capacity to survive, to like change our environment around us, to
Mhm.
think, to plan ahead, do things that, and we have a consciousness, things that animals, so far as we
Mhm.
know, at this point, don't have. And because of that, like I said, the founders observed this, is like, why would we be here? And why would we be built this way? And why would we have free will? And why would we have opposable thumbs? Why would we be like this if we were what, just meant to be like killed by other animals, by each other? No, we are meant to survive just like any other
Mhm.
creature. And so the right that we have, the natural right we have, is just to live and to do that thing. So it's not that there's some document somewhere in nature that goes, human beings get this. It's
Mhm.
just, nope, we are, and we can. And so therefore we will. And if we were to go, because we're social creatures, if we were to attack each other, kill each other, steal from each other, whatever, and do that at will as much as we want, we wouldn't last very long. We wouldn't
Yeah.
last very long. We've had to cooperate. Look at all through history, people even who could have killed each other off didn't. So in spite of all the war and all the things, we still managed to survive, in large part by cooperating voluntarily with each other, building, towns and
Mhm.
businesses and guilds and all kinds of things. I just think people are expecting the word rights to attach to government.
I think, yeah, they hear right and they conflate it with legal right, which is a very different thing. And
Yeah.
it's not a legal right; it's a
No.
moral claim. It's a
Yeah,
claim about what you
exactly.
ought do and ought not do. So, for example, I put this up because this is a very common argument I get, and I think Brass gets it all the time too. They'll say, "Oh, well, they say all men are created equal, but they had slaves." When we say that natural rights exist, we're saying that there's an objective moral claim being made. It's a law of human nature at minimum. You could, if you're more religious or you believe in God, then you say it's
Exactly. Yep.
divinely inspired. And because it's an objective law, it can be learned. It will be discovered over time. And because it can be discovered over time, it makes sense that people were wrong about it and learned more as they went forward. The laws of physics are a great example. They are objective, they are discoverable. Newton is an idiot compared to Einstein. Newtonian physics are just wrong compared to the theory of relativity. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean Newton was stupid. It just means he didn't know all the things that Einstein knew. So the
No.
fact that our founders were split on the idea of slavery is not terribly surprising, given that the idea that all the races were the same species wasn't scientifically established until almost 100 years later. At the time, that was a debated topic. They just didn't know. And the fact that they were wrong about natural law doesn't make natural law subjective or somehow immaterial. It just means that they were wrong about it, just like someone could be wrong about 2 plus 2, and that doesn't make math subjective.
That's right.
I hope that's helpful. Though I think, Clonati, you might be trolling. I can't tell because we're getting. I can't tell if these are topics to be taken seriously or not. So let me know. But
Yeah, I don't know. I just, like I said at the outset, I fear that the outcome of this could be to fuel things like we know Carl Benjamin is out there spewing, and he's not even an
Jesus
American. So
Christ,
it's like,
yeah.
shut up, but saying things like, oh, he defended all of your classical liberalism and they still killed him. Like, that is just such a nonsense statement. First of all, who's they? Second of
Mhm.
all, there's so much assumption about motive. We don't know. We actually really don't know the motive. Like I said, it could be multiple things. It could be much darker than we think. Than some leftist crazy person. That would be an easy explanation. There is the possibility it's something worse. And there are things worse, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I put this comment up because I think it's indicative of that. Like, there are things worse, and yeah, like when someone is stealing from someone, I think we inherently as humans know that's wrong. Like, somebody developed this property, someone put their heart and soul into it, and it was taken from them. And we know that was wrong. The same way we know that being killed for speaking your mind is
yeah,
wrong. It's
yeah,
not a matter of taste. It's not a question of whether, so well, some people like murdering people for speaking their mind, and some people don't. And I'm ambivalent about societies that kill people for speaking their mind. No, like it actually is wrong. And I
Mhm.
think that it's going to be important for us to have moral clarity about these points and to
Yeah.
speak about it with some conviction, because I agree with you. I think there's dark forces gathering, like,
Yeah.
and it's not just the left. Like there is definitely a post-liberal right that's gathering steam and will be galvanized by today's events.
Well, and they're Fabians. I mean, these people are not in any way, they're not
Have a good one, Ethan.
capitalists.
Sorry,
They're,
just saying
well,
goodbye
it's
to
okay.
chatter. Yeah, go
They're
ahead.
they're not capitalists. They will sit there and say, even Carl Benjamin, like, oh, Marx had good points. And then you've got some of these other people like Orrin McIntyre. Who the frick is that?
Mhm.
Daryl Cooper, we were on the wrong side in World War II. I mean, Ian Carroll, who is he? Where did he come from? Out of the blue, this guy from nowhere. And he's now, he's all over the place. There are some really weird characters who are taking up space on the alleged right, who are giving, they're talking about Gramsci and Marx having good points and we need to do what they said. You even see Chris Rufo now saying things like, yeah, it's time to use the left tactics and be just like the left and we can get power.
Mhm.
And then those who are saying that virtue is power, power is virtue, not we should have power, power should be used to do virtuous things, but power itself is a virtue. And I'm just like, what country do I live in right now?
Yeah.
And this is what's scary to me is that I think Charlie was a voice of moderation and all of that.
Well, I mean, part of it, I think, is the psyop. I think there are bad actors. I think there are people who are doing malevolent things. And then another thing that's very hard to unpack is the way the attention economy works.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I have a very tiny audience. Like, it's not like I have some huge streaming audience that sees everything that I do, but I can guarantee you the number of viewers on this stream would have a zero at the end of it that it doesn't currently have if I had titled it Blood for Charlie Kirk. We're on the warpath. Like, I guarantee you I would
Of
have more
course.
viewers. Um,
100%.
and I don't know how to fight that. Like in a world where you get rewarded for bad takes, how
Yeah.
do you deal with that? And historically, and this is a very new problem because historically, these ideas were disseminated in written form. They were longer. They were more detailed. Society was less literate, so they were often read by the people who were kind of knowledgeable and then disseminated orally. Like there were gating mechanisms where the bad ideas kind of got weeded out, and now we have the opposite. And I don't quite know how to fight that fight. Maybe no one does.
I don't know, except that there's a piece of me that wonders if all the people who think as you do and as I do, whatever, if we all just spontaneously disappeared from these platforms, in other words, if we went back to the old way, if we started like printing, if we made it kind of edgy and cool, it was kind of like, if you really want to know what's going on, like we're the real subversives. And if we leave all that to just devolve into like chaotic noise, because, and here's why I say that, the majority of people are not out there. The
Mhm.
majority of Americans are not there. The majority of Americans are busy working and doing their whatever. Maybe they go on social media a little bit, but they're really not paying attention to this to the extent that we think they are. It's a small but extremely active, extremely loud group. Um, and a lot of them are not even in this country, especially talking about X. A lot of them don't even live here. And I wonder sometimes we just kind of like picked up stakes, went offline and started doing things offline instead. Pamphlets again, papers, maybe that, that seems so, outdated. How are you going to disseminate how are you going to get the papers out? Whatever.
Mhm.
Honestly, I don't know. Put them up on freaking, posts, but so people have to walk by and see them. Put them up by billboards, things that are a little more old school. I like billboards. I really do. I
Yeah.
mean, people have to see them. They drive by, they see them. And billboards, I think, are very effective. But doing things that capture attention, but in the real world of real people, and murals, stuff like that,
Yeah.
instead of this digital crap that people can control, who sees it where.
Mhm.
And I just wonder if that wouldn't capture the imagination, the attention of people who are, a little nostalgic for a past they maybe never knew. Look, I talk to kids all the time. I have students and teenage students, and to a person, They wish they could have grown up without an internet. They're jealous of
Mm.
me. They say it openly. We make fun of them and say, "Oh, they're always on their phones." If they felt like they could give it up and still reach each other, that they'd all give it up at the same time. You're like, kind of like, okay, everyone ready? Let's drop it and let's go back to like Stranger Things style. They would do it. They hate it, but they feel like they're stuck with it. So I think we could maybe capture their imagination by going back to some old school ways of getting their attention. Radio. And I know I'm starting to sound insane. There's probably people like, "Who is your guest? She's a lunatic. We have to be online because they're online. So we have to be there to compete with them." But as you pointed out, we can't compete. We are not competing with them. We're failing.
Yeah,
Algorithm crushes us.
I think, yeah, it's really tricky, and this is not a analog platform. But before I was very opposed to social media, so I didn't do. I don't think I did any social media till my late 30s. I kind of rejected the premise. So like all my friends, I missed my high school reunion because it was a Facebook invite and I wasn't on Facebook.
Oh, that's fun.
Like I just didn't know what was happening. But then the as I got on, the first place I wanted to write was Substack. And the reason was kind of analogous to what you're saying. It's long form. People communicate in a different way. It doesn't have the character limit. It's not as hot takey. It's more about people exploring ideas. But I found it's almost impossible to capture the attention of people on Substack because it has no visibility. So you're kind of stuck in this loop, right? Where it's easy to criticize people who say crazy things with their large platform. But if you don't say crazy things, you don't have a large enough platform for the things you say to matter.
Exactly.
So what's the way out? And maybe it's that. Maybe it's we need to create alternatives. Maybe it's, and the way I've been leaning is education. I think maybe maybe I'm a former teacher. There's something we need to do in the way we're teaching our kids and the way we're showing them what the world is and isn't, that needs to be changed, and that we're just making mistakes that could be corrected. I'm not sure what the magic bullet is.
I don't know that there is one. And I've read enough history to think that all we can do is be the stewards, as long as we're alive, of the knowledge that we know is good and important and needs to make a comeback. Save the books. Keep as many books as you possibly can, because when, if they put everything on the internet, they can just erase all of that. So, hoard books, find a way to leave them to your children or put them in safekeeping after you're gone. I'm reminded of, not War of the Worlds. What's the other one? Time Machine. And part of the Time Machine, there's a library, and it ends up being run by a robot, but it's an actual library. And it's underground. And then there are all these little, the little kids are almost in like caveman clothes, whatever. And they discover this underground little library it's got a guardian robot that was put there, hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years before, to like guard the books because all the other humans were dying off. And then these kids discover it, and the robot is like reading them the books. And I'm thinking, like, we may get to that point, and we may get to the point where it's just the next person and the next person, because I do think this will eventually play itself out. We've seen throughout history these kinds of totalitarian movements, these mass formations of people losing their minds, caving into superstition and collectivism, tribalism, and this kind of stuff, whether it was the French Revolution and other kinds of, witch hunts and different things. And it burns itself out. People do survive. I mean, it's horrible. There's a lot of bloodletting, but people do survive and come out the other side. And they come out the other side craving what you and I are trying to give them. And we may not be able to give it to them in our lifetime, but maybe it'll be our children, maybe it'll be our grandchildren. So I'm trying really hard not to get too despondent about not being able to make it happen now, because I know that these things go in cycles and freedom always wins in the end. It's just when the end is going to be. And so that's kind of my hope, is that the truth will win out. Freedom is something people do want eventually, once they've tasted real tyranny. But I also know, the other thing I also know is the downside of technology is it drowns us out. The upside of technology is it can make things turn on a dime.
Mm.
So as bad as things are, they could, I mean, anything can happen. They could turn around. Again, go back to, we had MLK was assassinated, JFK was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, all these assassinations and the Vietnam War, like all at once. There were people back then, and the missile crisis, oh my God, the world was going to end. They felt like we feel, maybe worse.
Mm.
And I remember my dad telling me, he was shopping one day going, is a bomb going to fall out of the sky like right now? Like, they were genuinely afraid of nuclear annihilation, and that with all these assassinations, like the country was just going to implode into civil war. And then it didn't. Now, I'm not going to say everything got better, because I wouldn't say it got better. Certainly, we just kept like kicking the can down the road and stumbling along. We had a brief little thing in the 80s, it was a little bit better, but they didn't devolve into a civil war. And so I have hope that we can, just by keeping keeping our heads, those of us who don't have bloodlust after this,
Mm.
um, advising our friends and relatives, be like, look, I understand you're upset. I understand you want to go ahead and cry, go ahead and scream, punch a pillow, do what you have to do. Being angry is normal. Being like enraged even is normal. What's not normal is deciding that you need to take your rage on the road. That's where things get bad. So don't do that, because that is how tyrants win.
Yeah, I love the idea that you just expressed there, and unfortunately, because I do have work tomorrow, I'm going to
I
have
know, me
to
too.
end this pretty soon. Though I'm delighted and hope we have more conversations in the future. But I like the idea of classical liberals thinking of themselves as librarians. Because it's partly funny for me because one of my jokes I often make is that lawyers are, our profession. We're essentially attack librarians, but that's not the only way to be a librarian. And I think that for those of you who believe in classical liberal values, there's different ways to approach this. One is to preserve the ideas, to pass them on, to make sure that they're written down, that the books are preserved, and to act in a librarian that way. And for those of us who are a little bit more conflict seeking by nature, it might be to assert those ideas as forcefully as you can in the town square. But the treating us as librarians of these values, of this history, and finding ways to pass them on is a really inspiring way to think about it, and one I'm going to have to ruminate on. I really love that idea. Let me give you, because I am going to have to run, because otherwise I'm just going to be a wreck tomorrow. Can I give you like a last word, parting thoughts, where people can find you, what you do on X, what you talk about?
Sure. So on X, I'm Owl of Athena, or owl_ELC. And I'm on Substack, the reason we learn .substack.com. I write about education, topics in education, and I'm a little bit of a one-trick pony in the sense that I bring everything back to education, because I feel very strongly that it's the beginning, middle, and end of what ails us. Like, if we're going to mass educate our population away from our values, what do you expect? This is what you get. We've indoctrinated at least 5 generations now of people to be almost anti-American. And by American, I mean the founding principles. So, I'm trying to reacquaint people. My version of being a librarian of that is to write and speak on my YouTube channel, which is also the reason we learn, about these connections that I see between something happening right now and where it is in education, something happening in the curriculum right now and how it manifests on the street, et cetera, and so forth, because it's all there. And, our kids are just going to keep being like these people that we see, if we don't do something about it.
I'm so glad. I'm so grateful for you and your ideas, and I'm so grateful that we crossed paths on X, because I think we our various posts intersected, and we kind of instantly were like, "Oh yes, you, one of us." So
we have to find each other,
Yeah, no, it's
exactly.
really wonderful that happens. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
A few closing thoughts, because I really do have to go to sleep. I'm going to be a wreck tomorrow, but I did miss some comments. I want to make sure I talked about things that people said. We covered this one. Afton, really good to see you. Thanks for joining. Charlie's a modern day MLK, will have a similar impact. He might, actually. I think that, when we look at the history books about this time period, this assassination is going to be really significant. I don't know how yet, but it definitely will be. Um, it sucks that when people look at Sargon of Akkad for a history lesson, they have to go through Carl Benjamin video. Yeah, that does suck. And it sucks for like a bunch of levels. Like A, exactly what you said, and B, God, what a fall. That guy used to be a lot more interesting. AI garbage is going to drown us all in noise and force return to the old ways. That might be true. It might be that we only trust handwritten letters because the robots just can't control the pen, but they just infiltrate our spaces when we're typing. Fun fact: I would have a better chance to run for president, and not to like be an arrogant prick about this, but this is kind of why I'm doing this. Not because I want to run for political office, but it just occurred to me one day when I was just kind of going about my day to day life that like to do the humble brag thing, which I hate doing because it makes me feel really awkward about myself. But I'm a former teacher. I was in Teach for America. I taught in inner city public schools for 7 years. I put myself through law school. I graduated magna cum laude. I've had a really prestigious clerkship where I worked closely with a federal judge for a year and was mentored by him. I've litigated before the United States Supreme Court. And then I kind of realized, my God, I'm like 40 and I've done these things, but I'm not trying to impact society at all. I'm kind of just I'm doing my own private life, but I don't have any public voice. And it kind of just dawned on me that like probably I should do something with all those credentials and try to express some ideas rather than kind of sitting back passively and living my life. Maybe that's arrogant, but I think that's where I am. Tribalism is a tool. Yeah, I mean, I view it this way. All societies are built on nationalism, blood and soil. Like if you don't have some kind of tribalism, patriotism, nationalism, whatever, you just get run over by the societies that do. It's non-negotiable. But then our founders, in their infinite wisdom, added this other layer of natural rights on top of it. And you can always tell when you're talking to somebody who rejects the American proposition because they want to tip the tower over. So the fringe left will say, "Oh, the founders were slaveholders. You can't trust them," and they try to knock it over that way. And the fringe right will say, "Oh, weren't the founders really only talking about white people? Can't we just disregard all their philosophy because they were themselves racist?" So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen the other. Yes, America has been deeply, deeply divided, but I'd like to think that these principles are uniting and that these principles actually matter and that they they're why we've endured the way we have. I mean, I know you know this, Brass, but America's founding was just unique. Like I can't think of another country that had a bunch of the most learned people of the era sit down, talk about philosophy and political theory and government for months, and then come up with a system of government that was animated by a philosophical proposition, the quest for natural law, to find the way that humans can live best with each other, and then to put that into words. I mean, it's valuable, it's durable, it's worth preserving, and it's worth fighting for. And I think more and more what I'm doing as I speak publicly is trying to find a way to make that story sexy, trying to make it something that I can do in sound bites and I can pitch and I can distinguish from the partisan noise. Because when I talk to, I love arguing. I love the debates. I love talk to Pisco, talk to Destiny, talk to the Pondering, all these people. But they attempt to cast me as the opposing partisan, so then we can have a partisan fight. And that's not really what I'm trying to do. So I need to find a way to message this better and see if I can do more with that. Thanks, brother, and thanks for sticking with me. Yeah, I'm trying. I am trying to do this more. I don't know how often I'll be able to do it more. I had a little bit of a lighter week work-wise, and that's always the limiting factor for me. But I'm trying to do this more and hopefully get a little bit of momentum, because after kind of years of banging my head against the brick wall of the algorithm, I'm starting to see a little bit of growth, like the YouTube channel starting to grow. The X account starting to grow. I don't know whether it's worth making a Twitch account or not. I don't know. Maybe you guys have views on that. Let me know if I should do that, because I could multi-stream there. It'd be the exact same format, so it wouldn't change anything. But yeah, I'm starting to see a little bit of forward progress, and these things tend to be exponential. So once you see progress, it starts turning into more progress. And I've made enough connections now with people like Wick and people like Pisco, people like Destiny, that I feel like I can get onto certain platforms, and I'd like to make some more and see if I can have some more interesting conversations. But we'll see. Who knows? Maybe this whole project will end up being a dud. But for now, I think this is a fight worth fighting, and I think I have something useful to say. And I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of you, even my buddy. Let me see if I can get a good example of one of his quotes, so I can see what I've been dealing with while we've been talking. Yeah, even Kilamati, who says that here is wisdom with a weird symbol. Only corporations are founded, and accused us of not being enlightened and having cognitive dissonance, and then inform me that war is peace and ignorance is strength. Even my buddy Kilamati, I am grateful for you being along for the ride while I figure this out. And I think that I'm on the verge of coming up with how this branding might look, because I think there's actually a cohesive message here. But I'm tinkering with it, and I'm grateful for your support and grateful for your feedback. So anything you guys can do, let me know. And if anybody knows an editor, please, God, let me know. Finding an editor is very hard, and that would be an enormous accomplishment for me. Zero Fox, man, so grateful for you. Thanks for tuning in. I love talking to Deb. I thought she was great. I really love her posts. Please follow her if you don't already. There's just not enough vocal classical liberals out there, and she knows what she's talking about, and she's fighting the good fight. And I think that it's worth supporting people who are doing so. Anyway, thanks, buddy. Thanks to all of you. It is 12:12, and if I don't go to sleep, tomorrow is going to be a very, very rough day. So thank you all for tuning in, and keep questing for natural law. Till next time.